The Snow Walker's Son by Catherine Fisher. Published 1994 by Red Fox. Chapter 7. Now is answered what you ask of the runes. Jessa woke suddenly, her eyes wide. In the darkness, someone was crouching next to her. A hand was gripping her shoulder tight. "Come with me," the girl's voice whispered in her ear. With a sigh, Jessa heaved off the warm covers, slipped on her coat and soft leather boots. Then she followed silently through the swinging curtain of the booth. It was dark in the hall, and smelt of ale and meat. The fire had smouldered low, and some of the oarsmen lying in the corners snored. Carefully the girls slipped between them. One dog raised its head and watched. As they passed Thorkil's booth, Jessa paused, but the girl shook her head. "Only you, no one else." At the door, Helgi's guard was breathing heavily, slumped against the wall. All at once Jessa realized that the men had been drugged. No trained warrior would sleep as heavily as this. She stepped over him thoughtfully. Outside, the world was black. Water lapped against the shingle far off, and up on a hill a breeze rustled stiff branches. The girl led Jessa between the houses to one by itself at the edge of the settlement, and as they walked their feet splintered the puddles on the open ground. Above them the sky suddenly rippled and broke into light. Looking up, Jessa saw the eerie flicker of the aurora above the trees, a green and gold and blue haze over the stars, its gauzy shape flowing and rippling like a curtain. "Surt's blaze," the girl remarked. "The poets would say they were feasting in Giant Home." Jessa nodded, caught in the strange light that made the snow glimmer. Then she ducked her head and followed the girl into the low doorway. Inside it was dim and smoky. At the far end she could see someone sitting over the fire. She fumbled forward slowly and sat on an empty stool. The room was stiflingly warm. Around her the walls were hung with thick tapestries, dim woven webs of gods and giants and trolls and strange creatures. Opposite her sat an aged woman, her face wizened and yellow. Her thin hair was braided into intricate knots and plaits. Amulets and luckstones were hung and threaded among her clothes. She wore a stiff cloak sewn with birds' feathers, glossy in the dimness. As Jessa watched, the old woman's hand, its skin dried tight over the knuckles, drifted among the stones on the table in front of her, moving one, turning another over, small, flat pebbles, each marked with its own black rune. "Wait outside, Hannah." The curtain flickered as the girl moved through it. Jessa waited, watching the hands turn the worn pebbles. Then, without lifting her eyes, the woman said, "It is not that I have her powers. You must know that. I do not know what sort of creature she is, this Gudrun, no one's daughter, or what gods she worships. But she is strong. Still," a pebble clicked in the dimness, "I have something, some slight skill gathered over the years. I have spread my mind like a bird's wing over this kin. Here we are safe. She cannot see us." "Then if we were to stay here, Thorkil and I—" "She would not know of it, but you would not be able to leave. Her mind is the surface of a lake. All the world's reflections move across it." Jessa edged away from the fire, which was scorching her knees. "Yes, but escape. It would mean the men would be killed." "Men? The old woman looked up, her mouth twisted in a grim smile. "What are men? There are plenty more." Chilled, Jessa was silent a moment. Then she said quietly, "I won't have them killed. I won't have that." The pebbles turned. "There is no other way. They cannot go back. She would make them speak." "Well, that's it then. We must go on," she said as firmly as she could. Only her word was keeping a dagger out of Helgi's ribs. Yes, and the others too. And this wasn't the way. The old woman turned a last pebble and gazed down at it. "So the runes tell me." Jessa edged forward. The room seemed darker. Something rustled behind her. The old woman's amulets clicked as she moved. "Do you know," Jessa whispered, "what lives in Thrasishal? Is there anything there still alive?" "There is fear there. Yours, your cousin's, Gudrun's." "Hers?" The woman chuckled. "Oh, hers above all. Her eyes are always this way. 9 years ago, Brokyle Gunnarsson landed here. There was one with him, so muffled in coats and furs against the ice that no one could see him. So it has always been. They went north. They have not been heard of since. But I have felt her thought stretching out like a hand, touching, jerking back. Oh, yes, there is something in the hall, something alive, and she fears it as she fears her mirror." Jessa touched one of the stones. It was cool and smooth. "What do you mean, her mirror?" "Gudrun never looks in a glass." The shamanka turned and spat into the fire. "The runes have said her own reflection will destroy her. There are no mirrors in the Jarl's hold." And then, with a rustle of feathers, the old woman reached out and caught Jessa's wrist. A tight, cold grip. "One thing. She will have not let you go without some link, some tie to bind you to her. Find it, break it, whatever it costs you. As for Kari Ragnarsson, sometimes in the darkest part of the night I have thought that I felt something, a cold, strange touch on my mind." She shrugged and sat back, gazing at Jessa. "But I do not know what he is. When you find out, you might come and tell me." The road was an ancient one, built by giants. No one used it now. After only a few miles, it dwindled into a frozen track wandering through the boulders and scree of the fjord shore. The 6 horses and the pack mule picked their way along it, sometimes sinking fetlock deep into the icy bog. Jessa was stiff from jerking forward to keep her balance. They were already 4 hours out from Trond, the wind howling at them down ravines in the steep rock face. They had started before dawn, but even now it was barely light enough to make out the track as it began to turn inland, towards the hills. Muffled in cloaks and coats, only their eyes visible, the riders had spread out in a straggling line, urging on their slithering, nervous horses. Helgi went first, with Thorkil and Jessa close behind him. Then came the 3 men who had drawn the marked stones out of Helgi's glove at Trond, when the oarsmen had argued about who was to go further. Thorgard Blund and his cousin, the thin man called Thrand, and the big, loud-mouth Steiner, called Hairy Hand. Jessa wondered how they felt now. There had been some bitter words back there. Now the three kept together, watchful and resentful. The track climbed up, moving slowly above the snow line. Now the horses strode in each other's hoof-holes across a great snowfield, dazzlingly white, broken only by streams that gurgled under their seamed, frozen lids. These were invisible and treacherous. Once Thorkil's horse lurched forward into one, almost throwing him. After that they kept direction only by the sun. But the sky slowly clouded over, and by late afternoon they had lost the track altogether. Finally Helgi stopped and swore. The narrow valley down which they had come was closed by a sheer rock face, glistening with icicles and glassy twists of frozen water. He turned. "We'll have to go back. This isn't it." Jessa saw Steiner glance at his colleagues. "What about a rest?" he growled. "The horses need it." Helgi looked at Jessa. She tugged the frosted scarf from her mouth. "I'm in no hurry." They found an overhang of cliff and sat under it. Helgi fed the horses, then he joined them. They ate slowly, listening to the bleak wind in the hollow rocks. The other three sat apart, talking in gruff, quiet voices. Helgi watched them. Finally they called him over, and when he came they stood up. Steiner was bigger and heavier than the younger man. He put his hand on Helgi's shoulder. Talk became hurried, noisy, almost an argument. "I don't like the look of that," Thorkil muttered. Jessa raised her eyes from a daydream. Helgi was shaking his head angrily. He snapped something sharp and final. "They're scared," Thorkil said. "They don't want to go on." "Well, I don't blame them." They watched the bitter, hissed argument. These were soldiers, Jessa thought, trained how to fight, to deal with things. But how could they deal with this? The horror of whatever was in Thraseshell had caught hold of them. It was wearing at their nerves. "Do you think he'll make them go on?" "He'll try, but it's 3-1. 3-3. Thorkil flashed her a brief grin. "You're right. But remember, if we were out of the way, they wouldn't have to go on at all. They've probably been thinking about that." Helgi flung Steiner's hand from him and turned away. He marched past Jessa and caught the horse's bridle. "Ride close to me," he muttered, "and pray we find the place soon."